This presentation focuses on principal attitudes towards supporting the needs of out-of-field teachers. The presentation comes from a paper authored by Raphael Porsche from the University in Wetzlar in Germany and myself, Linda Hobbs from Deakin University. School leaders' decisions about what is necessary and attainable for their school are driven by instructional priorities and pragmatic constraints. But where the supply of teachers is inadequate, school principals need to make difficult decisions about allocating teachers to subjects out of field. So that is teaching subjects they're not qualified to teach. In many countries, out of field teaching assignments do help to alleviate difficulties in attracting certain types of teachers to certain types of schools or to certain geographical regions. This study focuses on principals from Germany and Australia, looking specifically at principals' attitudes and school practices in response to teaching out of field. There is a need to identify how principals' attitudes toward out-of-field teaching influence the types of support deemed necessary for out-of-field teachers. Anna Duplessis, for example, revealed that some school leaders view teaching out of field in general as a situation to be avoided and as a challenge for schools and teachers alike. Other research shows that other factors influence principals' decisions about teachers' fit, whether they fit a particular position or not, such as teachers' dispositions and pedagogical skills might be considered as to whether it suits a certain cohort of students, for example. But are there other situations where out-of-field teaching might be regarded as acceptable or even desired? And is there a common understanding about the professional learning supports and attitudes that might reduce the risks associated with out-of-field teaching? Some research has shown that decisions to assign teachers to out-of-field classes are based on an ill-informed understanding of the effects of out-of-field teaching on teachers' well-being and their student achievement. Little investigation, however, has examined factors influencing staffing decisions under these conditions and under what circumstances out-of-field teaching might be deemed tolerable. While attention has been given to the types of supports that out-of-field teachers need to maintain quality teaching, little research aligns specific supports, actions, and practices with principal attitudes. Duplessis' research has shown that it is not having to teach out of field necessarily that is the problem, but the supportive responses by school leaders. Denister et al.'s study differentiated between support from management, from mentors, and from colleagues for newly qualified teachers, finding that teachers are likely to get more support from their in-field subject than for a subject that's being taught out of field during that very important teacher induction period, leading to lower teacher satisfaction and less teacher retention under those circumstances. So of critical importance is understanding how school leaders, when making decisions about teacher assignment and teacher support, situate disciplinary knowledge in relation to teachers' practice, the inherent contradictions between teaching as generic and transferable knowledge and skills compared with the disciplinary nature of subject teaching and learning. Also, the tensions between the ideal and the practicalities in the face of teacher shortages. While out-of-field teaching may be considered a local pragmatic solution to the immediate problem of teacher shortage, does this automatically mean that school leaders are accepting this practice? The attitudes of school leaders to assigning teachers out of field, how this relates to their view of teaching quality, and the way they create a culture of support in their school are of critical importance to how teachers experience teaching out of field. Principals certainly play an important role in establishing the professional culture of the school, including the culture of support, innovation, and collaboration that might contribute to teacher learning and development. Principals create and organise teacher professional learning activities. They provide opportunities for informal learning, but they can also struggle to understand the subject-specific learning needs of their teachers. Breeden, for example, while he acknowledging the administrative burden that principals often face, state that highly affectable principals work to move teachers toward greater levels of independence and professional autonomy, rather than acting as gatekeepers of teacher learning. So he advocates that a constellation of formal and informal opportunities for teachers to learn and to improve their professional craft is crucial to school improvement and student success. Research shows that in some contexts, principals can have limited awareness of the structure of effective professional development and can even lack an appreciation of the importance of teacher PD to school renewal. So the research questions that we're looking at in this study are: what attitudes do principals in Australia and Germany hold towards teacher suitability for out-of-field teaching? Which professional learning support structures do principals in both countries consider relevant for these teachers? And how are teacher support structures related to these attitudes? This paper focuses specifically on interviews conducted with a small set of principals or vice principals from secondary schools in both countries. The analysis of the transcripts revealed categories for comparing principal responses, and we presented these as individual cases. So these are the cases. There are 8, 4 from each country. It's worth noting that in both countries, teacher assignment is at the discretion of the school principal. So even if teachers are hired for specific subjects, in both countries, it's up to the principal and the people who organise the timetabling to determine where teachers are assigned. And also in both countries, there's little accountability in ensuring teachers are specialised in the subjects that they teach. So there's 4 distinct attitudes that emerged from the analysis towards teaching out of field. Some principals express the view that teachers can teach out of field regardless of their specialisation, as long as they've got a strong foundation in teaching and they put the effort into preparing for lessons. So this relates to an idea of teaching as being pedagogical. Teaching quality from this perspective relates to teaching as generic skills and knowledge, and includes teachers' abilities to use cross-disciplinary skills. Teaching quality from this perspective relates to teaching as generic skills and knowledge that can be applied across different subjects. Also, the ability for teachers to build relationships with their students. These relationships, however, were sometimes contextualised by being steeped in teachers knowing how to share their love of the subject, for example. So case 6 talked about content knowledge is only one element of being a teacher. And for that particular principle, the relationship between teacher and students were very important. So this pedagogical relationship and student learn is potentially challenged if the teacher is struggling with teaching out of field. Learning from teachers who are not stressed is really important, and the difficulty in catering for the full spectrum of learning were 2 concerns that principals raised. The next category relates to teaching as passion. In this category, teaching quality is underpinned by teachers' passion for the subject, for teaching, for students engaging with the subject, and also their understanding of the school. There is recognition that out-of-field teachers can learn to teach a subject effectively when they're motivated by their patterns. There is recognition that out-of-field teachers can learn to teach a subject effectively when they're motivated by their passions. This demands a democratic process in assigning teachers to teach out of field. So teachers who are reluctant to teach the subject is a problem. But there may also be benefits where students are taught by a teacher who's passionate about the subject, even if they're not qualified. For example, a teacher who has a passion for engineering or for sewing clothes, and this may translate to quality teaching in subjects such as systems engineering or textiles. The third category relates to teaching as capability. In this category, teaching quality refers to the importance of teacher commitment to knowledge of content and teaching approaches, but that this can be acquired on the job and with experience over time, so not necessarily requiring initial teacher education and their tertiary education. One principal is quoted as saying, qualifications are only one gauge of the teacher's effectiveness. So if the teacher is a good teacher, they can teach most things if it's within their capable range of knowledge. So this idea goes to the often quoted understanding that a good teacher can teach anything. Principals refer to negative consequences of lacking this capability, however. So principals from both countries recognised similar consequences, largely negative, relating to not having the requisite teacher knowledge and teaching skills, and teachers not finding the additional time or having the self-commitment required to learn. Additional strain, concerns for well-being, and anxiety for both the out-of-field teacher who needs to stay one step ahead of the students, and for their colleagues who need to compensate for those teachers, produce negative effects. Negative effects can also refer to students not achieving high-level outcomes. Also mentioned was a broader consequence of poor student outcomes leading to families transferring schools because their students aren't being successful. The final category is teaching as being specialised. In this category, quality teaching is perceived to be steeped in strong subject knowledge, which arises from a history of engaging with the discipline and subject didactics and pedagogies. So the subject teacher is, at least in my eyes, says one principal, always a priority because he was trained much more extensively. An extension of this was a preference for in-field teachers in certain subjects or certain year levels over others. To be avoided, for example, were senior level classes and subjects with safety risks, such as physical education and technology and chemistry. The main subjects, like the core subjects, including maths and English, for example, were also to be avoided. In comparison, tolerance for out-of-field teaching was seen in the non-core subjects such as history, geography, politics, and German, as long as the teacher has the interest in it. Moving now to the principal's views about how to support the learning of out-of-field teachers. All principals were aware of formal and informal structures available for out-of-field teachers, both within and outside of their schools. The support structures mentioned indicate what came to mind for the principals when asked about the support needs of principals, rather than whether these supports are or are not provided. Collegial structures included support from colleagues, sharing of resources, a team structure that supported collegiality and team teaching. Some principals referred to teams of working together within subjects, so that everyone is supporting colleagues who are out of field and willing to exchange resources. Informal support also by colleagues who would step in and assist a struggling teacher, and those multidisciplinary teaching teams, they were all examples of that. In terms of coaching and mentoring, providing the out-of-field teacher with mentors where possible was considered important. Some principals referred to a mandatory observation from a trusted peer rather than their supervisor to get that coaching or mentoring from. They also referred to less formal buddy system, including primary teachers partnering with secondary teachers. Another strategy was teachers not given a total allocation but were allowed to have more time to reflect or work together and seek support from a mentor at the school or a coach. What was also interesting to note was that some of these strategies were included in policy at the school level. Reflection on practice was also mentioned by most principals. Such reflection was supported by peer observation and organised structures to promote reflection. Reflection circles, for example, were mentioned that allow reflection with other teachers on videos of their teaching practice. Also, a common strategy in the Australian principles were professional learning communities to identify what problems of practice are that, and then looking at their performance in response to those problems of practice. External professional development and certification courses was only mentioned by Australian principals, all of whom were deliberate in making clear the importance of both external networks, for example, and working with teachers from other schools as being part of maybe a subject association where that support could be provided through materials. Professional development was approached quite differently across schools. Case 4, for example, mentioned that teachers will do a certificate course for a subject they're not teaching. But it was interesting to see that professional development was either restricted to the school goals or it was provided in an unrestricted way on teacher request in other schools. What I'd like to do now is to bring these two ideas together to propose a typology. So we have the four ideas around teaching quality as pedagogical, as passion, as capability, and specialized. And then the focus of support that aligns with each of those. So if you have a view that is pedagogical, then the support is to develop those generic teaching skills, and you can see the types of supports that might be offered for those teachers. So that collegial support becomes necessary, the reflection on practice, but also those whole school professional development and professional learning structures that focus on those generic skills. In terms of passion, extending the passion of teaching becomes the focus. So again, collegial support, but from in-field colleagues in the out-of-field space becomes important. Undertaking formal certification supports from external networks, additional time to help those teachers understand the content and develop that interest in the subject, but also observing lessons from in-field teachers who are likely to be more passionate about the subject that they're teaching. Thinking about it as capability, then enhancing or extending that capability becomes important. So support from teachers' external networks, undertaking certification courses, collegial support, and observing other lessons from other teachers is also important. And then the last one, if the focus is on having to be specialised, and then formal certification or PD becomes the main way that a teacher would be supported and be considered the appropriate teacher to use. Collegial support from in-field colleagues would be important under those circumstances. So in discussion, central to decision-making for out-of-field teachers and their principals is reducing that risk associated with poor subject-related knowledge for teaching and improving teacher confidence by prioritising the support structures relevant to the teacher's needs. Most teachers express the opinion that the teacher has the capacity to learn and that they need to take some responsibility for their learning, but should also be supported to do so, which is in keeping with previous research. Principals can recognise that the needs of teachers vary and that a comprehensive, tailored approach to support is needed for different teachers who are placed into out-of-field teaching roles. According to research, quality leaders exhibit communal qualities of caring, collaboration, cooperation, empowerment, inspiring others, and relationship building. These are all qualities that a principal would need to develop what Anna Duplessis refers to as context consciousness, where principals would consider the teacher's context when administrative decisions about assigning teachers out of field are being made. So this analysis has not focused necessarily on how the context of the school has influenced principals' decisions. However, looking across the cases, there is evidence to show that the smaller schools in the sample, which were also rural and included some of the lowest socioeconomic groups, had a small teaching staff, and they relied more on teaching out of field to maintain the range of offerings that would attract families to a school. Important, especially where there's competition between schools. Sustaining teaching quality in these qualities requires a democratic approach to assigning teachers out of field, recognition of its risks, and supportive structures that extend beyond the school. In comparison, schools with larger teaching staff, resourcing, and limited competition with other schools and no problem of attracting teachers are in the privileged position of having less need for out-of-field teaching and therefore can base staffing and teaching assignments decisions on whether teachers are specialised or not. To conclude, unique to this study are 4 broad attitudes relating to the nature of teaching. Each indicated different perceptions about the focus of the support needs of out-of-field teachers and then how such support might be provided. Given that attitudes can determine behaviour and decision-making, this research helps to understand why leadership responses to out-of-field teaching can vary across schools. Thank you. Just a reminder that this presentation comes from this particular paper if you'd like to read more about the study. Thank you very much.